Thank you, Clark and Chris. And now we turn to Luke's Gospel, chapter 6, starting at verse 17. And Jesus came down with them and stood on a level place with a great crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people from all Judea and Jerusalem and the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon, who came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. And all the crowd sought to touch him, for power came out from him and healed them all. And he lifted up his eyes on his disciples and said, Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you shall be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, and when they exclude you and revile you and spurn your name as evil on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven, for so their fathers did to the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you shall be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when all people speak well of you, for so their fathers did to the false prophets. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We live in this world that is sometimes upside down. Our children and grandchildren teach us that all the time. They see things with different eyes than we do, especially in this age of technology. There's a story about a Sunday school teacher who was telling the children in her class that God loved them all the time, even when they were grumpy. And one child jumped up and said, and happy. Well, the teacher smiled and she started to go on with her lesson, but before she could, the child continued, and sleepy, and dopey, and sneezy, and dark, and bashful. This passage points out, though, that it's not just our children who make things upside down. This is Luke's account of the Sermon on the Mount, except Jesus and the others have come down to the flatlands. Therefore, biblical scholars and theologians have dubbed this account of the Beatitudes as the Sermon on the Plain. In it, Jesus seems to turn everything about faith and life inside out, upside down, and all around. But there's more to it than we see on the surface. Jesus didn't just come on the scene and suddenly stir everything up. It might appear like he took a big stick and whacked a hornet's nest to those who were listening. But Jesus really wasn't throwing the baby out with the bathwater or creating chaos for the sake of creating chaos. Jesus was actually righting what was wrong and putting everything back in place. You see, we have to take a look at God's promises. God promised the Israelites to be their God and make Abraham a great nation. For generations, God called the Israelites his chosen, and they called themselves children of God. They felt blessed and chosen like no other nation. All they had to do was to love God, love their neighbor, and obey the laws. Looking at Psalm 1, verses 1 through 3, we read, Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or take the path that sinners tread, or sit in the seat of scoffers. But their delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law they meditate day and night. They're like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in its season, and their leaves do not wither. In all that they do, they prosper. That's a really good promise from God. And they had no problem remembering the promise in all of its many and various forms. But they forgot the purpose of the promise. And what exactly was the purpose? From the very beginning, God defined that purpose in his relationship with Abraham. In Genesis 12, verse 1, God calls Abraham into this relationship. And then in verse 2, God lays out the purpose of that relationship. God tells Abraham, I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. That's the promise. Here's the verse in its entirety. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. That's the purpose. Abraham and the children of Israel were chosen and blessed by God in order to be a blessing to the rest of the world. And because they forgot the purpose of the promise, they turned the promise on its head. They turned their faith inside out and upside down. They crossed the Jordan and entered the promised land, but it seemed they left the purpose somewhere out in the wilderness, or they left it on the banks on the other side of the Jordan when they crossed. Reverend Jim Singleton told the story of a college student who had recently become a Christian. He got a summer job working on an oil rig out in the Gulf of Mexico. His pastor took him aside and tried to prepare him for some of the harassment he might receive. He told the young man, be on your guard. As soon as some of these guys figure out that you're a new Christian, they will constantly tease you and pick on you. Summer went by, and the young man came home. The pastor asked him how it went. And the young man said, oh, I fit right in. I acted just like they did. Things were great. They never figured out once that I was a Christian. The problem with the Israelites is that no one figured out that they were blessed in order to be a blessing. Instead, they began to live a theology of prosperity. They felt that if God blessed the righteous, those who delighted in the law, then surely God didn't care for those who did not. They began to feel and live as if those who prospered in life were the most blessed, and those who didn't prosper were cursed. So they began to use their wealth, their beauty, their power, position, and health as a measuring stick for their relationship with God. If you were wealthy, if your business prospered, or if you were physically blessed, then you were right with God. If you were poor, crippled, out of work, or an outcast, it was because God wasn't happy with you. And God said not to associate with those kind of people. Consequently, they began ignoring their responsibilities to the poor, the sick, and the outcast. Instead of being a blessing to them, they cursed them. In this sermon, though, Jesus confronts them. Luke makes the point of telling us that there were all kinds of people gathered to hear this sermon. People from every surrounding nation, from all walks of life. Luke also tells us that Jesus came down off the mountain and brought them to the plain. So symbolically and spiritually, Jesus brought everyone to a level playing field. And then he dropped this bombshell of a message that left huge holes in their neatly ordered understanding of God. Jesus just didn't turn everything upside down. Instead, he turned it all right side up. So what does any of this have to do with us? Well, we still live in a world where everything seems to be turned inside out and upside down. Year after year, those who have just seem to get more. Those without seem to get less. The poor get poorer and the rich get richer. And on one level, there's really nothing wrong with that. Life isn't fair. There will always be the poor, there will always be the rich, and then there's the rest of us. And people who work hard should be rewarded. But that's not what Jesus is talking about here. He's talking about our attitude toward and our practice of the promise and the purpose. Jesus is talking about our focus in life. When Jesus stood up and recited these Beatitudes, the poor, the hungry, the sick, and the powerless, they were probably groaning just a little bit. This all sounds like pie in the sky. Okay, quietly suffer here, you get your reward in heaven. Don't covet what others have, just be thankful you're alive. Wait until you see what God has in store for you. Blah, blah, blah. Nice soundbite. But it doesn't put food in your belly, and it doesn't pay you bills. The rich and the powerful were probably thinking, yeah, Jesus, you tell them. And that's when Jesus turned around and nailed them too. Woe to you who are rich and full now. Nobody got left off the hook. They had all remembered the promise, but forgotten the purpose. Basically, Jesus is saying, if you tune your heart and focus all your thoughts, energies, and ambitions on things of this world, you'll get them. But that's all you'll get. So what Jesus is calling for is something radically different. Jesus is calling for an upside-down faith, a right-side-up kind of faith, a faith and a practice of faith that is a blessing to others. Reverend Jim Moore tells a story about two sisters, Sue and Marjorie. They're out walking along the lake one day, talking about their day. Well, Marjorie saw something sticking up out of the sand and stopped for a closer look. To their amazement, it was a crumpled $20 bill. Her sister Sue admits she was a little bit jealous. Fortunately, she didn't need to be jealous for very long because just a few feet away from there, they found another $20 bill. The sisters continued on their walk and talked about their good fortune. When Sue got home, she couldn't stop thinking about how she would spend that $20. She decided to spend it on something absolutely useless, something just for her. But when the collection plate was passed in church the following Sunday, Sue noticed that Marjorie put her crumpled $20 bill in the collection plate. Sue writes, I was forever humbled. That day I discovered the true difference between me and my sister. And you know something? I can't seem to remember what I bought with that money. Marjorie was blessed to be a blessing. She got it right side up. Reverend Moore also talks about something that happened during World War II. There was a Jewish woman in France running away from the German Gestapo. She knew she was close to being caught. She was ready to give up. A Christian widow came to her home where she was hiding and told her it was time for her to flee to a new place. And the Jewish woman said, it's no use, they'll find me anyway. And the Christian widow said, yes, they'll come to this house and they will find someone here, but it's time for you to leave. I'll switch places with you and take your identification and wait here for the Gestapo. The Jewish lady understood the plan. The Gestapo would find the Christian widow and think she was the runaway Jew. The Jewish lady asked the widow why she would be willing to do such a thing. And the widow said, it's the least I can do. Christ has already done that and so much more for me. The widow was caught, mistaken for the Jewish woman, put into a concentration camp where she died a few months later. The Jewish woman never forgot what the Christian widow had done. Later, she settled in New York City, and eventually she became a Christian and dedicated her life to serve others. Only someone with a deep understanding of the promise of God and the purpose of our faith could have been such a blessing. But we're all called to have a similar sort of faith and be a similar sort of blessing to those around us. Our world is jumbled and upside down, but we've been blessed through our relationship with God, and we're called to be a blessing. And we do that, like here, by reaching out to those around us and helping them. One Christmas, the students at a nursery school were making handmade gifts for their parents. One little boy decided to make an ashtray for his dad because his dad smoked a pipe. The boy's teacher helped him as he formed the clay with those little hands. They fired the clay, brought it out of the kiln, and she asked the little boy, what do you want to do with it now? He said, I want to paint it blue. My daddy loves blue. So they painted it blue, glazed it, put it back in the kiln, fired it again. The last day of school before the Christmas holidays came. Time for the parents to come for the Christmas pageant and a party where the parents would receive their presents. When the pageant was over, the little boy picked up his supplies, put on his coat, and ran up to his father with that precious gift in his hands. On the way, he tripped. The ashtray hit the floor and broke into 1,000 pieces. The little boy sat in the middle of this pile of pieces, and he started to cry. His father came over to him, patted him on the head, thanked him, and said, it's okay, it really doesn't matter. And then the boy's mother sat down beside her son and said, I know it does matter. It matters a lot. And together they cried. After the tears were wiped away, the mother picked up a box, handed it to her son, and said, now let's pick up all the pieces and take them home and see what we can make out of what's left. And that's our faith. That's what we're called to do. We're blessed to be a blessing. We're called to have the kind of faith that reaches out and helps others pick up the pieces. We're called to have the kind of faith that looks at the world with different eyes. To have the kind of faith that helps turn this upside-down world right side up through the sharing of the good news of Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God for all the opportunities He gives us. Amen. Please stand and join me as we affirm our faith.